my God.
You doing okay, sir?
No.
I understand. We're going to get you out there as quick as possible.
United States, North Canton is a city in central Stark County, Ohio. At the 2024 census, the population was 18,500. It is a suburb of the Canton-Massillon metropolitan area, a town where everything seemed out of place. And with hustle and bustle all around, a chilling story began to unfold. On an ordinary night, a brutal crime shrouded in mystery and horror was committed. The victim, a young woman known for her warmth and kindness, was found breathless. A story of insane obsession that turned to anger and anger to revenge. There are some people who are so deeply immersed in their dreams that for them, the line between the imaginary and the real becomes blurred. But what happens if such a dreamer tries to draw someone else into his illusions? Morgan Ashley Fox was born on August 2, 1991, in the small town of Canton, Ohio. From a young age, she was an obedient and calm child, a diligent student, and a loving daughter. Morgan had many friends and easily got along with any group. She was popular among her peers at school. As a teenager, she started dating a boy, and shortly after graduation, she found out she was pregnant. The young couple in love was over the moon with happiness. They had a daughter, whom they named Amelia. Because of her early pregnancy, Morgan did not enroll in college. Instead, she took a job as an operations manager for a delivery service. Here, during one of her shifts, she met Jason McDermott. He liked to play video games and spent most of his free time on the internet. After a while, he started bringing her food and drinks on every lunch break and talking about her nonstop to his friends and acquaintances. Colleagues eventually realized that Jason was genuinely fixated on Morgan. The impression from the outside was that it was as if the young people were involved in more than just friendship and socializing. In fact, his behavior resembled an obsessive crush, which alarmed some of his colleagues. The guy found Morgan's social media pages and started following her posts. He even installed a special app to monitor her activity confidentially. At times, Jason secretly recorded videos of the girl. Despite his fascination, he behaved in a friendly manner and did not bother Morgan to the point of causing her displeasure. In August 2020, Morgan brought her friend Mary to the company for training, and Mary ended up under Jason's supervision. The girl immediately noticed how often and how much he talked about Morgan. It was so intrusive that Mary suspected something was off and advised Jason to stop and cease tracking her friend. She wanted the guy to stop monitoring Morgan's social media pages and gradually distance himself from her in order to cope with his obsession. Mary knew about similar cases of stalking and understood that it could all end badly. Unfortunately, the secret admirer ignored this advice. Despite Mary's warnings, he constantly admired Morgan's beautiful hair, talked about her daughter, and everything related to the object of his desire. Jason clearly sought to develop a relationship and started with friendship. Now he had a new obsessive idea to ask Morgan out. He completely ignored the fact that the girl was already in a serious relationship, preparing for a wedding, and everything was going well with her fiancé. In June 2020, Morgan moved into a new house on Fraser Avenue with her fiancé and daughter, Amelia. To celebrate the housewarming and her birthday, our story's heroine decided to throw a party, inviting friends, relatives, and coworkers, including Jason. At that time, she considered him just a friend and was unaware of his obsession. For Jason, however, this invitation was another sign that Morgan was hiding her feelings for him. He had repeatedly shared his ideas about getting closer to the girl with other employees, but most doubted his plan would succeed. Of course, he ignored these warnings, as his own fantasies convinced him of the need to confess to his beloved. Jason decided to use the party to finally stop being just a friend and become Morgan's boyfriend. Jason acted like he was a member of the Morgan family at the party. The hidden admirer helped organize the party, served the food himself, and even struck up a conversation with Morgan's grandmother as if he were a member of the family. Overall, he was pleasant and accommodating, but his actions seemed strange and intrusive. Some of those present tried to find out the identity of this young man and whether he was romantically involved with Morgan. Morgan vehemently denied any romantic relationship with him, referring to Jason as just a good friend and coworker. Most likely, it was very upsetting for the guy, because he was afraid of being rejected and never dared to declare his feelings openly. Later, an incident occurred that seriously damaged their friendly relationship. On October 8, 2020, Morgan briefly left her mobile phone unattended at work. Jason, knowing the password he had previously peeked at, took this opportunity to learn even more about his beloved on her device. He unexpectedly discovered intimate photos of Morgan and, being delighted, even showed them to other guys from the office. Upon returning to her workplace, the girl quickly realized that someone had used her phone and viewed the explicit pictures. This made her very angry. Jason was an obvious suspect because he was always near her desk. A coworker hinted to Morgan to pay attention to 3 young men who were discussing something near her seat while she was eating lunch. She approached them to ask, and they immediately ratted Jason out, claiming that he had done it. Morgan became furious and accused him of invading her privacy. Jason denied everything at first, but then succumbed to the pressure. Infuriated, Morgan stopped communicating with him and blocked him on social media. Finally, her eyes were opened to his unhealthy obsession and stalking of her. She heard from colleagues about his frank conversations and infatuation with her, which caused concern. Morgan knew about stalkers and was afraid of becoming a victim of one. Therefore, she completely cut off contact with Jason and even told colleagues about her desire to change jobs. Obviously, Morgan's reaction was not taken calmly by Jason. Although he understood his guilt, he assured the girl that he had only viewed her intimate photos but had not downloaded or shared them, although it later turned out to be untrue. However, Morgan was adamant in her decision to stay away from him. Meanwhile, Jason asked colleagues to help him restore communication with the girl. He wrote her a long letter of apology, which several acquaintances signed. In this message, he begged for forgiveness and asked to be unblocked on social media. Through the mediation of colleagues, he continued to bombard Morgan with messages and tried to call her, but was rejected every time. Jason's friends and coworkers noticed changes in his behavior and appearance. Literally the day after Morgan brushed him off, he became disheveled, unkempt, and ignored remarks from the department manager. It was evident that, due to the quarrel and obsession, Jason was barely sleeping and looked bad. Moreover, during lunch breaks, it became noticeable that he had stopped eating properly. Despite everything, the young man still cherished the hope of rebuilding his relationship with Morgan. On October 24, 2020, Morgan was visiting relatives in Columbus, Ohio. Jason sent her a short message asking how she got to her family. The girl was shocked, as she had told almost no one about this trip. She realized that Jason was still following her. When she asked him how he knew about her being in another city, there was no response. This brief dialogue was the last documented communication between our story's heroine and her stalker. On October 28, 2020, Morgan Ashley Fox was getting ready to go to work on the night shift. The groom escorted his beloved to the door, kissed her goodbye, and they parted. He went to bed, and she to her car. When the man woke up around 6 a.m. to get ready for work, he made himself coffee as usual and looked out the window. What he saw instantly alarmed him. Morgan's car was still in the driveway, and moreover, it was parked in such a way that it could not be fully seen. This seemed strange, as his fiancée's work shift had not yet ended. Troubled by what he saw, the guy decided to go outside and examine the car with his own eyes to find out what had happened. On the way, he grabbed his mobile phone and tried to call Morgan, but at the very moment he crossed the threshold and opened the front door, he heard the sound of her phone ringing. The fiancé ran to the car and saw a terrible sight. The driver's side door was open, and in the seat was his beloved, covered in blood and showing no signs of life. She did not respond to the calls of her mobile phone, which lay at her feet on the ground and was ringing incessantly. Stunned by what he saw, the frightened young man immediately called 911 emergency services.
911, do you need police, fire, or medical help?
Police, medical. I'm pretty sure my girlfriend's dead. I got up for work, came out, looked outside, I seen her car out here. I came out here and she's laying in her front seat. Oh my God.
You doing okay, sir?
No.
I understand. We're going to get you some help here as quick as possible.
A team of paramedics, along with the police, arrived at the scene in just a few minutes. They officially declared 29-year-old Morgan Ashley Fox dead, the cause of which left no doubt: 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Apparently, the victim had just managed to get behind the wheel when she was attacked. Her feet were still on the ground while her body was already in the car seat. Characteristic signs of rigor mortis had already appeared on the body, by which the time of death was determined quite accurately, around 2 in the morning. The girl died instantly and without suffering after the very first fatal shot to the head. Unfortunately, there were no video surveillance cameras installed in the area of the house where the couple lived. Also, no spent casings were found at the crime scene. Neither the neighbors nor the victim's fiancé heard any gunshots or noise from an unfamiliar vehicle. None of them noticed anything suspicious that night. Nevertheless, the investigators managed to find tire tracks on the asphalt that were obviously left in a hurry. It appears the attacker fired 2 shots, probably from a pistol equipped with a silencer, and then quickly disappeared from the crime scene in a car. This was clearly evidenced by the nature of the marks on the road surface. As the car drove away, pieces of rubber, earth, and mud were bursting out from under the wheels. However, despite this, none of the local residents heard anything suspicious. The deceased's fiancée and her friends told investigators about one intrusive young man who had been behaving strangely for a long time and was clearly very interested in Morgan. Of course, they were talking about Jason, her coworker, with whom the girl's relationship had seriously deteriorated shortly before the tragedy. Many considered him the most likely suspect in Morgan's murder. The police decided to check his alibi and found out that he had arrived at his night shift at 2:57 a.m., where he stayed until about 10 a.m., after which he went home. Theoretically, the guy had the opportunity to commit the crime, since his alibi was not confirmed at 2 in the morning, but the time frame was pretty narrow. Many people described Jason's strange relationship with Morgan, who, in her naivety, allowed him to get too close to her. People said that she allowed this man too much, recalling at least his behavior during the party at her house where he felt like the host. Ultimately, it all resulted in a clear violation of privacy and an intrusion into the girl's personal life, because of which she completely ceased communication with this colleague. Investigators were well aware of this model of behavior, and stalkers refusing to communicate often becomes a motive for them to attack. For police officers, the most intriguing information was the significant change in the young man's behavior after Morgan brushed him off. He began to behave carelessly and was clearly experiencing psychological problems. It was very strange that after Morgan's murder, he had stopped by the car wash after work and thoroughly washed his blue Ford from top to bottom, even though it was pouring rain outside and there was no reason to wash the car. It didn't really jibe with his recent carelessness about his appearance, about which his coworkers had expressed concern. They said he didn't care about his car or how he looked. Moreover, according to the testimony of coworkers, the car was clean and clearly not in need of maintenance. An examination of his vehicle yielded no results. Nothing was found inside. Of course, the investigators treated this information with suspicion. First of all, they checked the only available evidence, the tire tracks left in the mud in front of the victim's driveway. It seemed that the tread prints were identical to the tires of Jason's car. Moreover, such a tread pattern was quite rare. Undoubtedly, this automatically made him the prime suspect in the murder. In search of evidence, the police reviewed the recordings from all the surveillance cameras that could have captured the perpetrator's route. In the footage, they managed to spot a car similar to Jason's when it stopped at one of the intersections near Morgan's house. The recording was made at 1:35 a.m., after which the car headed towards the home of his future victim. It was captured on cameras a second time around 2:20 a.m., when it was returning the same way. When investigators learned about Jason's intrusive behavior, they decided to thoroughly examine his electronic devices. Thanks to this, the detectives were able to prove that the suspect was gathering information about the girl, secretly monitoring her activity on social networks. This allowed him to find out almost everything about her, where she lived, what her daily routine was, which made it possible to plan the attack in such a way as to remain unnoticed. To investigators' surprise, the suspect's cell phone did not signal in the area of the victim's home at the time of her murder. All this time, the device was at Jason's house. The guy explained this by saying that he had forgotten his mobile phone and worked the whole shift without it. For the same reason, he allegedly could not find out why the object of his obsession did not show up for work. However, this did not exclude the possibility that he deliberately left the phone at home to avoid tracking his whereabouts and divert suspicion from himself. The perpetrator turned out to be quite cunning and cautious, which seriously complicated the investigation. On November 1, Jason published a post on his social media page in memory of Morgan in which he wrote, "You were a bright light in my life and the lives of many other people. You were always there when I needed you. I would like to list everything about how you influenced my life, but the list would be so long that we would never reach the end. You were a friend. If I had a bad day, I knew that I could always come and talk to you." This post ended with the hashtag #JusticeForMorgan. 3 days after the crime, Jason went to the store with his friend Mickey. There, he continued to talk about Morgan, who was no longer among the living. From Jason's words, it followed that he had an intimate relationship with the deceased girl. And now these memories would remain the only recollection of her, which he intended to cherish for the rest of his life. 4 more days after the massacre, he again found himself in the company of his buddy Mickey. He asked about exactly how the video cameras that capture traffic on the roadways work. He was interested in whether they record continuously or only take short videos when sensors detect speeding, but he never got an answer to his question. During a meeting with the mother of the deceased at the funeral, Jason continued to surprise with his behavior. He told the woman a story about how he once gave her daughter a stuffed toy, and now he insistently asked to return this gift, claiming that it would be a good reminder of what a wonderful person Morgan was. The young man was so persistent that he almost broke into the mother of the victim's car, begging her to give him the toy. The woman even had to raise her voice to finally get him off her back with this request. Fortunately, the evidence gathered against Jason in the form of surveillance camera footage and tire tread marks were sufficient for his arrest. On November 4, 2020, he was detained on suspicion of committing the murder and later charged with premeditated murder with aggravating circumstances and stalking with threats. After his arrest, police scrutinized his hands. In the case of using a firearm, traces of gunpowder gases can remain on the skin for a long time, and they are not always washed off even during a shower. Therefore, there was a possibility that even a few days after the crime, these traces could still be detected. Forensic experts conducted a thorough analysis, but no powder residue was found on Jason's body. His clothing, which he was wearing on the night of the attack, was also checked, but no traces of gunpowder gases were found on it either. This fact was actively used by the suspect's lawyer, trying to prove the absence of direct evidence and the clear contradiction of the facts with the version of the investigation. On April 2, 2021, the trial in this case was held. In court, several witnesses from both the victims and Jason's inner circle considered the murder charge to be erroneous. The defense argued that the police relied only on indirect evidence, while there was no direct evidence of the young man's involvement in the girl's death. Many friends and relatives described him as a calm and non-aggressive person. Despite his obvious obsession with his colleague, none of them could believe that Jason was capable of such a thing. And indeed, the prosecution's arguments were based solely on indirect evidence. But all the circumstantial evidence pointed specifically to Jason. Detectives have discarded the robbery or sexual assault leads. Firstly, the victim was not missing anything, including valuables in the car and her purse. Secondly, no signs of sexual violence were found either. It was a quiet, peaceful area where no gangs operated, so Morgan could hardly have become an accidental victim of some criminal showdown. The nature of the tire tread marks found at the crime scene matched those of the defendant's car. Moreover, the attacker clearly tried to make it so that his car remained unnoticed by the victim. He could have lurked in ambush, waiting for the right moment. According to the prosecutors, the defendant wanted Morgan not to see his vehicle until it was too late, and she did not have time to call for help. One of the key questions in the case was the murder weapon, which was never found. It was known that Jason owned a firearm. He had a Ruger .22 caliber revolver, which law enforcement seized for inspection. The victim was shot with a similar weapon, but after a ballistic examination, it became clear that this particular revolver was not the instrument of the crime. The investigation never managed to find the very pistol from which the fatal shots were fired. However, this did not exclude the possibility that Jason could have illegally purchased another pistol with a silencer, killed the girl, and then disposed of the weapon. In addition, the prosecution focused on the suspect's strange behavior, in particular on the fact that he thoroughly washed his car, probably immediately after the attack, and this despite the fact that it was raining outside. The young man tried to explain his actions by the presence of mental problems and symptoms of obsessive-compulsive disorder. However, the experts did not confirm that he had any such disorders. Anyway, taken together, these facts looked extremely suspicious. When the defendant was asked why he was in the area of the victim's home shortly before her murder, he denied the very fact of his presence there. However, there was no exact geolocation data to confirm the police's words, since his phone remained at home and the GPS module in the car was turned off. The only evidence that he was there was the recordings from the surveillance cameras, but the defense argued that the footage simply captured a similar car, because due to the poor quality of the night shooting, it was impossible to see the license plates. As for washing the car, Jason additionally explained this by saying that he was allegedly going to go to his mother to give her a birthday present, so he decided to wash the car beforehand. However, as it turned out, the holiday itself took place back in June, 4 months before that, so on the part of the son, it looked like an obvious delay. Naturally, the court regarded his words as untrue. Numerous witnesses at the trial spoke about the defendant's obsessive behavior towards Morgan. He clearly tried to cross boundaries and pretend to be a much closer person than he actually was. The girl did not take his behavior seriously, which allowed him to get so close to her and even cherish illusions about a possible shared future. Jason did indeed manage to become a close friend of Morgan's, right up until he violated her privacy by looking at the explicit photos. This happened just 20 days before the massacre, after which the young man desperately tried to restore their communication, but all his efforts were in vain. It was probably this that pushed him to such radical actions. After all, he was the only one with a real motive for murder. On the night of the murder, colleagues noticed striking changes in Jason's behavior at work. He looked much more cheerful than in previous days. When asked what had happened, the guy said that Morgan had supposedly resumed communication with him and even added him as a friend on social media, so he hoped that she had given him another chance. However, employees doubted the truthfulness of his words because before that, they had communicated with Morgan and knew about her unwavering position regarding Jason. That same night, Jason showed his colleagues a photograph in which he and Morgan were pictured together in the office. He considered this picture a wonderful, friendly gift. At the same time, the guy himself expressed concern that the girl did not show up for work. To all the questions of his colleagues, he answered that he had no idea where Morgan could be since he had left his mobile phone at home. Later, when everyone learned about the girl's death, his actions began to seem even stranger. Jason's behavior changed again. He became more agitated and repeatedly expressed concern that GPS data from his car could be the reason for being held liable. He confessed to his colleagues that he was passing through the area where Morgan lived on his way to work on the night shift, but then changed his story and began to claim that the GPS device in his car could have been hacked and someone was trying to frame him. Then, Jason told his coworkers that the day after the murder, his car was allegedly stolen but quickly returned. Later, detectives found out that Jason had created a fake social media page, which he used to spread a fictional story about his intimate relationship with Morgan. He described in detail what allegedly happened between them, and even used explicit photos of the girl from her phone as confirmation of his words. This activity began back in June 2020, and according to the prosecution, could have been an attempt to create an alibi. In these conversations, the suspect told several women the same story on behalf of Morgan, the same one that he retold to his friend Mickey while walking around the store. It seems he was trying to spread information about intimacy with the victim, probably to divert suspicion from himself. Bullets matching the gun used to shoot Morgan were indeed found in Jason's home. However, he claimed that he kept this ammunition for his father's revolver, which was given to him as a means of self-defense. Due to the absence of casings at the crime scene, the ballistic examination could not definitively establish from which weapon the shots were fired. At the same time, such a number of coincidences looked extremely suspicious and became another indirect piece of evidence of the young man's guilt. Jason's close friend came to his defense. According to his buddy, the defendant never showed aggression or anger towards Morgan. Although he was obsessed with the girl, he would never harm her. According to the friend, Jason was extremely upset that Morgan had blocked him on social media and refused to communicate. He was very worried about this, lost his appetite and sleep. But according to the confession of a close friend, Jason blamed only himself for everything and understood that he had done wrong. He did not feel rage towards the girl and was not going to take revenge on her, so he clearly could not be the perpetrator of this murder. The defendant himself insisted that under no circumstances could he have done this to Morgan. He admitted that he had the most tender feelings for her and was ready to let her go if it was impossible to build a relationship. The lawyers emphasized the fact that Morgan Fox was an attractive girl and had many admirers. In their opinion, from the very beginning of the investigation, the police focused only on Jason and actually did not consider other possible suspects. They say the goal of the detectives was to prove Jason's guilt and not to find the real culprit. However, despite the persuasiveness of the defense's arguments, the prosecution insisted that it had done all the necessary work, during which no other obsessed admirers of Morgan were identified except for Jason. The deceased's fiancée also underwent a thorough check. No traces of gunpowder gases were found on his hands, which were examined immediately after the tragedy. There were no bloodstains on his clothes, and he successfully passed a polygraph test. According to the prosecution, Jason was a skilled manipulator who had been hiding behind the mask of a treacherous friend for years. The defendant turned out to be a pathological liar who managed to deceive everyone around him, but everything's secret became apparent when he lost control of his feelings for the victim. Then it became clear that in reality, he was a self-centered and extremely jealous type. And after the phone incident, the girl decided to completely sever all ties with him. Jason harbored a grudge and decided to take revenge. He simply could not come to terms with the fact that Morgan would be with someone else. This idea was also confirmed by the behavior of the defendant himself. He clearly harbored illusions about the relationship with the victim and was wishful thinking. Despite all the efforts of the investigation, the young man turned out to be surprisingly well prepared. Throughout the entire investigation, forensic experts never managed to find the murder weapon, bullet casings, any fingerprints, DNA traces, or personal belongings that Jason could have left at the crime scene. He even managed to skillfully hide his exact whereabouts, despite the fact that modern technology is literally packed with tracking tools. All this put the prosecution in an extremely disadvantageous position. They had to convince the jury and prove the suspect's guilt, relying only on indirect evidence and assumptions. The only physical evidence that was obtained was the tread marks identical to those on the wheels of the defendant's car. The prosecution tried to prove that a typical stalker appeared before the jury who acted exactly as people of his type usually do in such situations. He really pursued Morgan, which was confirmed by numerous correspondences and the testimony of colleagues. That's the question. Could he really have gone so far as to kill someone he loved so much? On April 22, 2021, the jury retired to the deliberation room to discuss the verdict. The court found Jason guilty of aggravated murder as well as harassment. Jason McDermott was sentenced to 180 days in prison for stalking in addition to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jason McDermott has never admitted his guilt. Jason's lawyer insisted on a review of the verdict, but all appeals were rejected by the court.